The fire alarm I pulled wasn't part of the plan, but watching 400 guests in designer gowns evacuate into the rain while my husband stood on stage mid-speech was absolutely worth the spontaneous decision. I stood across the street under an awning, water streaming down the marble steps of the Celestine estate, watching security scramble. My husband Derek stood frozen at the podium, his carefully rehearsed investor pitch dying in his throat as sprinklers activated throughout the ballroom. Nobody knew I'd pulled that alarm. Nobody knew a lot of things. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The real revenge would come in exactly 17 minutes when everyone was allowed back inside. But first, let me tell you how I ended up sabotaging my own property. 3 hours earlier, I'd arrived at the Celestine estate through the service entrance, carrying a catering staff uniform I'd borrowed from the manager. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sneaking into a building I'd purchased anonymously 6 years ago for $42 million. Derek thought his investment firm had rented the venue for tonight's annual gala. He'd bragged about it for months, telling everyone how he'd personally selected the most prestigious location in the city for their biggest fundraiser of the year. What he didn't know was that his wife, the woman he introduced to everyone as just a freelance decorator, owned every chandelier he walked under, every marble tile beneath his polished shoes, and every security camera currently recording his every move. I adjusted my uniform and slipped into the kitchen where the real staff was preparing appetizers for the evening's 500 guests. Politicians, tech moguls, entertainment industry executives, and old money families would all be drinking champagne under crystal chandeliers, celebrating Derek's firm's successful year. A year built partially on my anonymous investments, filtered through enough shell corporations that even Derek's forensic accountants would need months to trace them. But that revelation would come later. Much later. Right now, I needed to be invisible. Extra server for the VIP section, I told the kitchen manager, showing the credentials that had cost me $5,000 to forge. Not that I needed to forge them, I owned the building, but maintaining my cover required commitment to detail. The manager barely glanced at me before waving me toward the service elevator. Perfect. The Celestine estate was a masterpiece of Gilded Age architecture, restored to its original glory through 3 years of painstaking renovation that I'd overseen personally, hiding behind a web of contractors and property management companies. The ballroom featured 30-foot ceilings, hand-painted frescoes, and those famous crystal chandeliers imported from Austria. Derek had proposed to me in this building 7 years ago, back when it was still abandoned and crumbling. He'd broken in through a window, spread out a picnic on the dusty floor, and promised me that someday he'd be successful enough to rent this place for a party. I'd smiled and kissed him, never mentioning that I'd already put in a preliminary offer to purchase it. That was before I learned what kind of man I'd married. The service elevator opened onto a hidden corridor that ran behind the ballroom's walls. Through carefully concealed observation windows, I could watch the guests arriving without being seen. These windows had been my addition during renovation, installed by a contractor who thought they were for historical documentation purposes. I pressed my face close to the glass, watching Derek work the room in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He looked good, I'd give him that. Tall, handsome, with that easy confidence that came from old money and private schools. The kind of man who'd never been told no, never faced real consequences, never imagined his docile wife might be playing a completely different game. There she is, Derek's voice carried clearly through the hidden speakers I'd had installed. He was talking to Marcus Wellborn, the billionaire whose investment would make or break Derek's firm. My wife. The decorator. The way he said it, dripping with condescension, made my jaw clench. She couldn't make it tonight, Derek continued, and I watched him place his hand on the lower back of a woman I recognized as Sienna Cartwright, a marketing executive from his firm. Work obligation. You know how it is with these creative types. Can't keep a schedule. I was supposed to be at the gala. Derek had given me an invitation 3 weeks ago with specific instructions to wear something appropriate and try not to embarrass him in front of important people. Then, 2 days ago, he'd uninvited me via text message. Derek, change of plans. Stay home tonight. This is a serious business event. Need to make the right impression. Me, I already have a dress. Derek, trust me on this. You'll thank me later. These people are out of your league. Out of my league. In a building I owned. At an event being catered by a company I held majority shares in. Serving wine from a vineyard in Napa that I'd purchased as an investment property 4 years ago. The universe had a sense of humor. I watched Derek laugh at something Marcus said, watched Sienna lean into him just a bit too close. Through my hidden vantage point, I could see what the other guests couldn't, Derek's hands sliding from her back to her waist, familiar and possessive. Interesting. My phone buzzed. A text from my property manager, who had no idea his boss was currently standing 10 feet away from him dressed as a caterer. Vincent, final headcount 487. Bar service confirmed. All systems operational. I'd hired Vincent 3 years ago specifically because he was efficient and unquestioning. He managed the Celestine estate beautifully, never wondering why the owner never wanted to meet in person, never questioning the instructions that came through encrypted emails. Me, perfect. Maintain standard protocols. The evening's entertainment was beginning. A string quartet played in the corner while servers circulated with appetizers I'd personally approved last week through Vincent. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Well, almost exactly. I hadn't planned on Sienna Cartwright's hand resting on my husband's chest. Hadn't planned on the way he smiled at her, the same smile he'd given me 7 years ago when we first met. But I'd learned to adapt. Through the hidden corridor, I made my way to the estate's control room. Another room the guests didn't know existed, where every security system, every camera, every electronic lock converged. The security guard looked up when I entered. Kitchen said they needed someone to check the VIP section temperature controls. He nodded, already turning back to his monitors. Perfect. I moved to the panel that controlled the ballroom's environmental systems, pretending to adjust something while actually memorizing the security guard's patterns. He checked cameras in a sequence: main entrance, ballroom, corridors, exits. 20-second rotation. Predictable. All set, I told him, slipping back into the corridor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first part of my plan was simple: observe. Document. Let Derek perform his carefully rehearsed show while I gathered evidence of exactly who he really was. Because that's what tonight was really about. Not just humiliation. Not just revenge. But revelation. Derek had spent 7 years underestimating me. 7 years of subtle condescension, of introducing me as just a decorator, of explaining things to me like I was a child, of making decisions without consulting me because business matters were complicated. He had no idea that his decorator wife held an MBA from Stanford, graduated top of her class. Had no idea that her freelance work was actually a network of strategic investments that had quietly built a portfolio worth $200 million. Had no idea that the reason he'd gotten his first major investment 7 years ago was because I'd anonymously funded it through a venture capital firm I'd created specifically for that purpose. I'd fallen in love with potential. With a charming man who seemed ambitious and driven. What I got was a narcissist who took credit for every success and blamed others for every failure. The decorator story had started as a cover for my business activities. Derek had assumed it was my career because I'd made some comments about enjoying interior design. I'd never corrected him. Instead, I'd watched as he built his entire self-image around being the successful one, the breadwinner, the man in charge. Tonight, that image would shatter. I moved through the hidden corridors to a position behind the main stage. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see Derek preparing for his big speech. Marcus Wellborn sat at the VIP table, looking bored. Sienna Cartwright was touching up her lipstick. Everything was ready. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Unknown, the transfer is complete. Documents are ready for your signature. I smiled. My lawyers had been busy. But first, the speech. Derek took the stage to applause. He looked confident, comfortable, in his element. This was his moment, his triumph. His firm had grown from a small operation to a major player in the investment world, and tonight was meant to cement his reputation. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek began, his voice smooth and practiced. Thank you for joining us at this magnificent venue. When I chose the Celestine estate for tonight's gala, I knew I wanted something that represented the excellence and prestige our firm embodies. I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. He chose it. As if he'd had anything to do with it beyond signing the rental agreement Vincent had sent him. 7 years ago, I started this firm with a simple vision, Derek continued. To create something exceptional. To build wealth not just for ourselves, but for all our investors. And tonight, I'm proud to announce that we've exceeded every target, every goal, every dream we dared to dream. The audience applauded. I watched Marcus Wellborn lean forward, interested now. But success doesn't come from just one person, Derek said, and my heart rate picked up. Was he actually going to acknowledge me? It comes from surrounding yourself with the right people. People who understand excellence. People who share your vision. He gestured to the VIP table where his senior partner sat. Where Sienna Cartwright sat, looking up at him with admiration. These people believed in me when no one else did, Derek continued. They saw potential where others saw risk. They invested not just their money, but their trust. And together, we've built something extraordinary. Not one mention of his wife. The woman who'd actually provided that initial investment. The woman who'd quietly funded 3 of his rescue deals when clients had backed out at the last minute. The woman who owned the ground he stood on. Perfect. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Vincent. Me, activate Protocol 7 in 15 minutes. Vincent, confirmed. Protocol 7 was something we'd established for emergencies. It gave me full control of the building systems from my phone. Vincent thought it was a security measure. It was, just not the kind he imagined. Derek was still talking, listing his firm's achievements, most of which I could have contradicted with evidence of my silent involvement. But that wasn't tonight's game. And now, Derek said, his voice building to what he clearly thought was a crescendo, I'm thrilled to announce that Marcus Wellborn's investment group has agreed to a partnership that will take us into the next stratosphere of growth. The room erupted in applause. Marcus stood, acknowledging the attention with a modest wave. This was it. Derek's moment of triumph. I checked my phone. 13 minutes until Protocol 7 activated. Through the hidden window, I watched Derek return to his table, accepting congratulations, his hand finding Sienna's under the table. They thought they were hidden by the tablecloth. They weren't hidden from the cameras I'd positioned at exactly the right angles. The evening continued. Dinner was served. Courses I'd approved, wines I'd selected, all presented in a venue I'd created from ruins. Every element of Derek's perfect night had my fingerprints on it, invisible and unacknowledged. My phone timer went off. Time. I moved quickly through the corridors to a specific position behind the stage. From here, I had a clear view of the main ballroom and access to the manual fire alarm I'd deliberately left unconnected from the central system during renovation. This alarm would trigger the sprinklers but not alert the fire department. A contained chaos. I pulled it. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Sirens wailed. Sprinklers activated throughout the ballroom. 400 guests in designer clothes screamed and rushed for the exits. The string quartet abandoned their instruments. Servers dropped trays. Derek stood at his table, frozen in shock, his tuxedo already soaked. Sienna clutched her ruined dress. Marcus Wellborn looked furious. I slipped back through the corridors to the service entrance, ditching my catering uniform for the dress I'd hidden there earlier. A stunning red gown that cost more than Derek's car. My real clothes. My real appearance. By the time I walked around to the front of the building, the evacuation was complete. Rain poured down as guests huddled under awnings and umbrellas, their evening thoroughly ruined. I spotted Derek in the crowd, soaked and furious, yelling at Vincent. My property manager looked confused and apologetic, trying to explain that the fire department was on their way, that he didn't understand what had triggered the alarm. Perfect position for my entrance. I walked up the marble steps of the Celestine estate, my heels clicking authoritatively, completely dry under my umbrella. Heads turned. Confused looks. "Derek," I called out, my voice carrying across the chaos. He turned, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and anger in rapid succession. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "I told you to stay home." I smiled, taking in his ruined tuxedo, his dripping hair, his shattered evening. "I'm here," I said clearly, making sure everyone nearby could hear, "because I own this building. And I think it's time we had a conversation about exactly who's out of whose league." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain hitting marble and the distant wail of fire trucks. Derek's face went white. Marcus Wellborn stepped forward, interested now. And I realized that pulling the fire alarm hadn't been spontaneous at all. Some part of me had been planning this exact moment for 7 years. "Shall we go inside?" I asked, producing a key card from my purse. "I believe we have a lot to discuss. And unlike the rental agreement you signed, I don't have a curfew." The fire trucks arrived 6 minutes later, their sirens cutting through the rain-soaked night. I stood on the steps of the Celestine estate, still dry under my umbrella, and watched Derek's carefully constructed evening dissolve like sugar in water. "What do you mean you own this building?" Derek's voice cracked on the last word. Around us, his guests were pulling out phones, capturing this moment for posterity. Social media would have a field day. I smiled at the fire chief who approached, a man I'd met several times during the building's renovation. "Chief Morrison." "False alarm, I'm afraid. A malfunction in the legacy system. My apologies for the inconvenience." "Miss Thorne?" He recognized me, confusion flickering across his face as he glanced at Derek. "I thought this was a private event." "It is," I confirmed. "I'm the owner. This is my husband, Derek Ashe." Chief Morrison's confusion deepened as he looked between Derek and me. "Your husband? But the rental agreement was signed with my property management company," I interrupted smoothly. "My husband wasn't aware of my ownership. It was meant to be a surprise." Derek's face had progressed from white to a disturbing shade of purple. "This is insane. You're a decorator. You can't afford a $42 million property." I finished for him. "You're right. I couldn't. Not on a decorator's salary." I paused, letting the rain fill the silence. "Good thing that's not actually what I do." Marcus Wellborn stepped closer, his expression shifting from annoyance to fascination. "Thorne. Victoria Thorne. Your VT Capital." Finally. Someone had done their homework. "I am," I confirmed, watching Derek's confusion multiply. "Have been for 9 years. Since before I met Derek, actually." "VT Capital has a portfolio worth," Marcus stopped, calculating. "Over 200 million. You're the ghost investor. The one everyone tries to pitch but no one can reach." "That would be me." I turned to Derek, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish. "Surprise, darling." The gathered crowd was growing. Guests who'd been huddling under awnings were creeping closer, phones out, recording. This would be all over social media within minutes. Perfect. This is some kind of joke, Derek stammered. A prank. She's lying. I pulled out my phone, opened the property management app, and held it where everyone could see. With a few taps, the Celestine Estate's exterior lights began to dance, turning off, turning on, cycling through colors. The building responds to my commands, Derek. Would you like me to demonstrate the indoor features as well? How, was all he managed. Stanford MBA, graduated at 23. Started my first company at 24, sold it for $18 million at 26. Used that to start VT Capital. I've been building my portfolio for 9 years. I lowered my phone. You never asked about my education. Never asked about my work. You heard decorator and decided that was all I could be. Sienna Cartwright, her designer dress clinging wetly to her frame, spoke up. Derek said you were struggling. That he was supporting you. I laughed. Derek's apartment when we met? I bought it. The car he proposed to me in? I bought it. His first major deal that launched his career? I funded it through 3 different shell companies. You're lying, Derek repeated, but his voice was weakening. The rental contract for tonight's event, I continued, addressing the crowd now. Signed 2 months ago for $85,000. That money went into an account I control. You've been paying me rent on your own apartment for 6 years, Derek. Market rate, through a property management company. I've collected over $400,000 from you. His face went slack. Marcus Wellborn was openly grinning now. This is extraordinary. Derek, you've been pitching me on your financial acumen while your wife has been quietly building an empire that dwarfs your entire firm. His firm that I've secretly invested in multiple times, I added. The Henderson deal that fell through 3 years ago. I bought Henderson's stake anonymously and kept Derek's firm solvent. The Morrison account last year? I'm Morrison Holdings. Derek sank onto the wet steps, his perfect tuxedo ruined, his perfect evening destroyed. Why? Why did I help you? I descended the steps until I stood directly in front of him. Because I loved you. I thought your ambition was real. I thought we were partners. We are. No. My voice was ice. Partners don't uninvite their spouses to events via text. Partners don't introduce their wives as just a decorator with contempt dripping from every word. Partners don't. I pulled out my phone again, opening a video file. Hold hands under tables with their marketing executives. I played the footage. Crystal clear video from my hidden cameras showing Derek and Sienna at his office Christmas party last year. Kissing in the conference room. The audio was damning. Sienna gasped. Several people in the crowd started whispering. I have 14 hours of footage, I said calmly. Restaurants. Hotels. His office. My building has excellent security cameras. You spied on me? Derek found his anger now, standing. That's illegal. Actually, it's not. This is my building. The security cameras are disclosed in your rental agreement, Section 12, Paragraph 4. You signed acknowledgement that all common areas are monitored. I turned to the crowd. I've had lawyers review everything extensively. Chief Morrison cleared his throat. Ma'am, if there's no actual fire, we need to clear out. Of course, Chief. Again, my apologies. I handed him a card. Send the invoice for the false alarm response to that address. I'll pay any fees. He nodded, signaling his crew. The fire trucks began to pull away, leaving behind a crowd of soaked, fascinated socialites and one devastated man. I want a divorce, Derek said suddenly. Already filed, I replied. This morning. Papers should be delivered to your office, my property, on Monday. You have 30 days to vacate. You can't evict me. I can and I am. The lease is in default due to your misrepresentation of financial circumstances. You claimed income levels you don't actually have. It's all detailed in the notice. Marcus Wellborn was watching this unfold with obvious delight. Derek, I think we need to discuss our partnership arrangement. Marcus, wait. No, I don't think I will. Marcus adjusted his wet jacket. I invest with people I can trust. People with integrity. You've been running your firm on your wife's money while treating her like an accessory. That's not someone I want managing my investments. I watched Derek's empire crumble in real time. His biggest deal, his moment of triumph, disintegrating on the rain-soaked steps of my property. The investors, Derek whispered. Everyone here. They'll know exactly who you really are, I finished. Just like I finally do. Vincent approached cautiously, tablet in hand. Miss Thorne, should I refund tonight's rental fee? No, I said clearly. The event happened. Mr. Ashford's firm can keep their evening, such as it was. Consider it a parting gift. Derek looked up at me, something breaking behind his eyes. I did love you. I do love you. You loved the idea of me, I corrected. The supportive wife who didn't ask questions. Who made you feel important and successful. You didn't love me enough to actually see me. I turned to address the watching crowd. The Celestine estate will be closed for the rest of the evening. However, I'd like to invite everyone to return next month for a proper gala. A celebration of women in business. Tickets will be free, and all donations will go to organizations supporting female entrepreneurs. Applause rippled through the crowd. Several women were nodding approvingly. Derek's firm is not invited, I added. Obviously. More applause, louder now. Sienna Cartwright had slipped away during my speech, I noticed. Probably racing home to update her LinkedIn profile and distance herself from Derek as fast as possible. Smart woman, in her own way. I trusted you, Derek said, still sitting on the wet steps. I built my whole life thinking you were superior, I interrupted. Thinking you deserved credit for success that came partially from me. Thinking your wife was simple and sweet and uncomplicated. I crouched down to meet his eyes. I gave you 7 years of chances, Derek. 7 years to ask about my day, my work, my thoughts. You never did. What happens now? Now? I stood, smoothing my dress. Now you figure out who Derek Ashford actually is without my money propping him up. The divorce papers are generous, I'm not trying to destroy you financially. You keep whatever you actually earned. But the apartment, the car, the investments I made? Those are mine. I have nothing without those, he said hollowly. Then you have nothing, I replied. Welcome to the perspective of everyone you've looked down on for the past 7 years. Marcus Wellborn stepped forward. Ms. Thorne, I'd like to discuss investment opportunities with VT Capital. Perhaps over coffee next week? I handed him my card, my real business card, the one Derek had never seen. I'd be delighted, Mr. Wellborn. The crowd was beginning to disperse now, guests calling cars and ride shares, their evening transformed from elegant gala to unforgettable drama. I could already see phones out, social media updates being typed with wet fingers. By tomorrow morning, Derek Ashford would be infamous. The man who had everything handed to him by his wife and never noticed. The cautionary tale about hubris and blindness. I felt no satisfaction in his pain. No joy in his humiliation. Just a strange, hollow relief that the performance was over. Miss Thorne? Vincent approached again. Should I begin preparations for the Women's Business Gala? Yes. Spare no expense. I want it to be spectacular. I glanced at Derek, still sitting motionless in the rain. And Vincent? Change all the security codes. Mr. Ashford no longer has access to any properties under my management. Including his apartment? Especially his apartment. He has until Monday to collect his personal belongings. After that, anything remaining will be donated. Vincent nodded and disappeared inside. I stood alone on the steps of my building, no longer hidden, no longer playing a role. Just Victoria Thorne, visible at last. Derek finally stood, water streaming from his ruined tuxedo. I never knew you could be this cold. You never knew me at all, I replied. That was always the problem. He walked away into the rain, shoulders hunched, phone already pressed to his ear. Probably calling his lawyer. Probably realizing that his lawyer's office was in another building I owned. I'd been thorough. The rain was stopping now, clouds breaking apart to reveal stars. The Celestine estate stood behind me, lights glowing warm in the darkness. My building. My achievement. No longer a secret. My phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. Rachel, divorce papers filed. Prenup is airtight. He signed away rights to any property owned before the marriage. You're protected. Me, thank you. Send me the final billing. Rachel, this one's on the house. Best entertainment I've had in years. I smiled, pocketing my phone. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Managing the fallout, dealing with media requests, restructuring Derek's firm's lease agreements. But tonight, I could simply stand here and feel the weight of pretending lift from my shoulders. 7 years of playing small. 7 years of watching Derek take credit, accept praise, build himself up while keeping me minimized. 7 years of patience and planning and waiting for exactly the right moment. The fire alarm had been impulsive, yes. But only in timing. The revelation itself had been inevitable from the moment Derek sent that text uninviting me to my own building. Some people never learn that the quietest person in the room might be the most powerful. That underestimating others says more about your own limitations than theirs. That real success doesn't require an audience or applause or recognition. It just requires patience, strategy, and the wisdom to know when silence serves you better than speech. Derek had spent 7 years talking. Building his reputation on words and appearances and performance. I'd spent 7 years building actual power. In the end, only one of those things lasted. I turned and walked back into the Celestine estate, my heels echoing in the empty marble foyer. The chandeliers glittered overhead, the frescoes gleamed in the soft light, and everything, every single thing, was exactly as I'd designed it. Not just the building. The entire revelation. The perfect moment. The inescapable truth. Derek would recover, eventually. Men like him usually did, finding new audiences who didn't know their history, rebuilding on new foundations. The world was forgiving to men who failed up. But he would never forget the night he discovered his wife owned the stage he'd been performing on. The night his entire reality rearranged itself, and he realized 7 years too late that he'd never been the star of his own story. I was. And I always had been. I walked through my ballroom, past overturned chairs and abandoned champagne glasses, water still dripping from the sprinklers. Tomorrow, my staff would clean and restore everything to perfection. Just like I'd restored my own life tonight. No longer hiding. No longer diminished. No longer Derek Ashford's underestimated wife. Just Victoria Thorne. Owner, investor, strategist, and finally, after 7 long years, completely, authentically visible. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destruction. It was revelation. Letting the truth illuminate exactly who had the power all along, who built the empire, who deserved the recognition. and watching the man who'd stood in my light discover he'd been a shadow all along. I smiled, turned off the ballroom lights, and locked the doors behind me. My building. My terms. My life. Finally. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.